The dawn broke slowly over the vast North American wilderness, casting golden light across forests so dense they seemed endless, and rivers so wide they mirrored the sky. Long before the idea of a nation existed, before flags, borders, or the dream of independence, this land thrived in its own rhythm. It was a world shaped by seasons, spirits, and stories passed from one generation to the next. The continent was alive with the footsteps of its first peoples, each tribe carrying a deep connection to the earth they called home. In the northeast, the Haudenosaunee tended their fields of corn, beans, and squash, the Three Sisters, treating the soil as a living relative rather than a resource to be used. In the plains, herds of bison thundered beneath the open sky, followed by the agile hunters whose lives depended on understanding the animals' migrations. Far to the west, in valleys carved by ancient rivers, the tribes of the Pacific tended cedar forests and fished salmon from icy waters. Every region had its own customs, languages, and dreams, yet all shared one belief: the land did not belong to them, they belonged to the land. But beyond the Atlantic horizon, unseen by these communities, ships began cutting through the waves. They carried explorers with eyes fixed on opportunity, adventurers hungry for riches, and settlers fleeing crowded cities or seeking the promise of a new beginning. When the first wooden masts appeared on the coastline, they brought both hope and danger, threads that would soon weave into the vast tapestry of American history. The early encounters between native peoples and Europeans were complicated mixtures of curiosity and caution. Some welcomed the newcomers as potential allies or trading partners, exchanging furs for tools and weapons. Others sensed the disruption these arrivals could bring. Yet even those who mistrusted the strangers could not predict how profoundly their world would change in the centuries to come. As settlements grew, forests were cleared and small coastal towns formed: Jamestown, Plymouth, Charleston, each reshaping the landscape in its own way. The colonists saw the land not as a shared spirit, but as territory to be claimed, divided, and owned. They named rivers that already had names, raised fences on open fields, and introduced laws born from distant monarchies. Complications multiplied, alliances were forged, wars erupted, and the struggle for survival dominated both native nations and European settlers. Still, amidst this tension, something new began to emerge. Children born in the colonies grew up speaking English, but feeling a loyalty that stretched beyond the crown. They learned from native neighbors, adapted to the harsh winters, and shaped their own customs and identities. This blend of cultures, tragic, complex, and transformative, became the seed of a future nation. Yet at this early dawn of the continent, no one, neither the tribes who had lived here for millennia, nor the settlers carving out fragile colonies, could foresee the immense story that was beginning. The land waited, vast and unfinished, its future unwritten. A nation was stirring, still only a whisper in the wind. The year was edging toward a storm, though few could yet hear the distant thunder. In the 13 colonies, life went on in the familiar rhythms of farming, trading, and navigating the uncertainties of a new world. But beneath the surface, beneath the laughter in taverns, the church bells on Sundays, the creaking docks of busy ports, there was an unease that spread like smoke. It drifted through the streets of Boston, seeped into the plantations of Virginia, and wound its way through the forests and towns from New Hampshire to Georgia. Something was changing. Tension had been building for years, fueled by laws passed an ocean away. Colonists who had carved lives from wilderness now felt the weight of a king who had never set foot.
Soldiers. When the British tightened their grip on the colonies, Annalise joined a secret network of women who carried intelligence between towns. She baked loaves of bread with tiny scrolls hidden beneath the crust. She rode through backwoods trails at dusk, delivering warnings about troop movements. Few knew her role, but without her, entire patriot militias would have walked blindly into ambushes. In New York, at a bustling waterfront, Elias Mercer, a dock worker, used his strength not only to haul barrels, but to move crates filled with smuggled gunpowder meant for colonial fighters. British patrols frequently searched the docks, but Elias knew the tides and shadows better than any officer. He whistled coded tunes to signal danger, slipped information to ship captains loyal to the Patriot cause, and once even hid a wounded rebel beneath a pile of fishnets until nightfall allowed safe escape. Farther south in Charleston, a free black carpenter named Josiah Reed quietly fought his own battle. Skilled with tools and known for his kindness, he built furniture for British officers by day, but at night he listened at their doors, memorizing their conversations, plans, complaints, orders, and relayed them through trusted channels. Though he risked not just imprisonment, but enslavement or death, Josiah never hesitated. Freedom, he often whispered to himself, must belong to all, or it belongs to none. Children, too, joined the silent rebellion. A 12-year-old girl in Pennsylvania, Sarah Ellington, acted as a lookout while her father printed Patriot newspapers. She learned to distinguish the heavy footsteps of British soldiers from the lighter steps of neighbors. Her small hands helped hide ink plates beneath floorboards, and when the printing press was almost discovered, she deliberately spilled boiling water to distract the soldiers, saving her father's work and perhaps even his life. These people, untrained, unpaid, unnamed, were the lifeblood of the resistance. They wove the unseen fabric of revolution. The notes passed in dark alleys, the warnings whispered before dawn, the courage carried in secret hearts. They were individuals living ordinary lives, yet their choices tipped the scales of history. Together, the sons and daughters of liberty proved a simple, powerful truth. Freedom is not won by the mighty alone, but by countless quiet acts of bravery that echo across generations. The spring of 1775 carried an uneasiness that clung to the air like early morning fog. Roads that once bustled with traders and farmers now echoed with hurried footsteps and whispers of British patrols. The 13 colonies had long simmered with resentment, but in the towns of Lexington and Concord, the pot was finally ready to boil over. Here, where stone walls bordered winding dirt paths and church steeples pierced the sky, a revolution waited with held breath. The British, determined to crush growing rebellion, had set their eyes on the hidden Patriot stockpiles in Concord. Orders were clear: seize the weapons, arrest the dissidents, and remind the colonies that the Crown's authority remained absolute. But secrets traveled quickly through New England. Riders loyal to the Patriot cause, swift, fearless, relentless, spread warnings through the night. Among them was Paul Revere, galloping across moonlit roads, calling out to startled households, "The regulars are coming out!" In Lexington, the militia, simple farmers carrying muskets they used more often for hunting than warfare, gathered on the green before dawn. Their captain, John Parker, stood tall despite the illness weakening his body. His men looked to him.
At the center of this storm stood John Adams, fiery and relentless, arguing that the colonies must form a continental army and stand as one. Across from him was John Dickinson, his calm voice urging negotiation rather than bloodshed. Their debates shook the wooden floors, echoing late into the night. Some feared that unity was a dream too large for a scattered people. Others believed it was their only hope of survival. Despite the tension, one figure offered unexpected strength: George Washington. Tall, composed, and deeply respected, he accepted command of the Continental Army with humility. His presence alone reassured the delegates that the colonies could rally behind a leader who valued duty above ambition. Washington knew he faced staggering challenges: poorly supplied troops, little training, and uncertain loyalty. But he also understood that the cause required patience and perseverance. While Congress wrestled with political unity, ordinary colonists fought their own battles. Farmers shared grain with soldiers they had never met. Blacksmiths from New York sent tools to militias in Connecticut. Women from Virginia sewed shirts for men in New Jersey. People who might once have viewed each other as strangers now saw themselves bound by a common fate. Slowly, threads of shared identity began to weave together. Still, the dream of unity wavered. News from battlefields was grim, supplies grew scarce, and loyalty remained divided in many towns.
British ships loomed along the coast, a constant reminder of the empire's reach. The colonies were fighting not only a superior military power, but also their own doubts, fears, and divisions. Yet the idea of a continental identity, of Americans standing as one people, refused to die. In the quiet moments after debates, in the letters carried across colonies, in the prayers whispered before sleep, hope persisted. The dream was fragile, but it was real. And as the colonies struggled to unite, they took their first steps toward becoming something larger than any of them had ever imagined. A nation born not of uniformity, but of shared purpose and unyielding resolve. Winter came early in 1777, harsh and unforgiving, sweeping across Pennsylvania with icy winds that clawed at clothing and numbed the bones. By December, General Washington led the battered Continental Army into Valley Forge, a quiet stretch of hills and forests that would soon become a crucible of suffering and transformation. The men who marched in wore boots with holes, coats and tatters, and expressions etched with exhaustion. Yet Washington had chosen this place not for its comfort, but for its strategic advantage. It was a gamble, one that would test the very soul of the revolution. The camp was little more than a scattering of wooden huts, hastily built from frozen timber. Smoke curled from crude chimneys, carrying the smell of burning bark and damp straw. Inside, soldiers huddled together for warmth, sharing thin blankets and meager rations of fire cake, flour mixed with water, cooked on hot stones. Supplies were scarce, disease was plentiful. Frostbite gnawed at toes and fingers, while sickness, typhus, smallpox, pneumonia, claimed men faster than British bullets ever had. Washington walked among his soldiers daily, his tall figure wrapped in a faded cloak, boots sinking into snow. He spoke to men who had not seen their families in years, listened to their fears, and watched as they clung to courage by the thinnest thread. Though he carried his own doubts, he never showed them. The fate of the revolution depended on his steadfastness. If he faltered, the army would crumble, and with it, the dream of liberty. But Washington's gamble was not merely to endure the winter. It was to reshape his ragged force into a true army.
Information to flow without detection. The British soldiers who watched her pegging sheets to dry never imagined she held the key to their demise. Another silent warrior was Robert Townsend, a merchant whose polite interactions with British officers granted him access to gossip, troop movements, supply shortages, and political tensions. He wrote reports with a steady hand, hiding them inside wooden containers, barrels of goods, or simple market baskets carried by trusted couriers. Even children played roles in this hidden war. A young tavern worker named James Armistead, later known as James Armistead Lafayette, infiltrated British camps pretending to be an enslaved servant seeking refuge. What the British did not know was that James had already pledged himself to the American cause. He listened, observed, memorized, and brought Washington intelligence that eventually helped trap the British at Yorktown. These spies fought without uniforms, without recognition, and without guarantees of safety. If captured, they faced execution with no trial, no honor, no mercy. Yet they persisted, driven by a sense of duty that matched any soldier on the front lines. Their secret war shaped the course of the revolution. Through their efforts, Washington learned of British strategies before they unfolded. Armies were repositioned, traps avoided, opportunities seized. The enemy, confident in its power, never realized how much of its strength was being quietly unraveled from within. History often celebrates battles with grand monuments, but the victory of a nation also depended on ink that vanished, coded lines in letters, footsteps taken in darkness, and courage that never sought applause. These silent heroes, unseen yet indispensable, helped tip the revolution toward freedom, one secret at a time. By the summer of 1777, the British believed they had devised the perfect plan to crush the rebellion once and for all. Their strategy was simple but bold. March south from Canada, seize control of the Hudson River Valley, and split the colonies in half.
For General John Burgoyne, confident, elegant, and certain of victory, the campaign seemed destined for triumph. With seasoned troops, cannons, and native allies at his side, he pushed forward with the certainty of a man who thought the war would soon be over. But the wilderness of northern New York had its own intentions. Dense forests swallowed the British columns, slowing their progress to a crawl. Rivers overflowed, roads turned to mud, and patriot militia ambushed from the shadows. Every mile became harder than the last. Supplies dwindled, horses collapsed, and across the region, whispers spread. The British are coming, hold the line. Waiting for them near the small village of Saratoga were thousands of American soldiers, led by General Horatio Gates, a cautious man, steady and calculating. But beside him stood someone altogether different, Benedict Arnold, fierce, impulsive, and burning with the desire to prove himself. Their uneasy partnership would shape everything that followed. The first clash came at Freeman's Farm in September. Smoke drifted through the trees as musket fire thundered across the fields. Arnold, defying Gates' hesitation,
Darkened lanterns, silent as a shadow. At dawn he struck with astonishing boldness, boarding enemy ships before their crews were fully awake. Many British captains grew to fear the sight of his tattered sails approaching out of the mist. While privateers disrupted trade, the Continental Navy launched its own daring commander, John Paul Jones, a man whose name would echo through history. On his ship, the Bonhomme Richard, Jones sailed not along the shores, but across the ocean itself, carrying the war directly to the British Isles. His boldness stunned the world. When facing the massive British warship Serapis, Jones refused to surrender, even as his ship burned around him. "I have not yet begun to fight." His defiant shout became a rallying cry for the revolution. Back in North America, coastal towns held their breath as British ships patrolled the coastline, enforcing blockades meant to starve the colonies into submission. But American sailors found ways to slip through narrow inlets and marshy waterways the British did not know. They created hidden supply routes, guided by fishermen who knew every current and every shifting sandbar. Naval warfare also sparked innovation. Americans experimented with underwater explosives, fire rafts, and even an early submarine, the Turtle, pirated by Ezra Lee in a daring attempt to sabotage a British warship in New York Harbor. Though the mission failed, it marked the beginning of a new kind of warfare that the British had never imagined. Though small in number, America's naval fighters transformed the sea from a symbol of British supremacy into a battleground of resistance. Each captured ship, each disrupted blockade, each daring raid chipped away at the edges of an empire that once seemed unshakable. The war at sea proved a powerful truth. An empire may command the oceans, but it cannot conquer the spirit of a people determined to be free. As the guns fell silent and the smoke of battle cleared, the revolutionaries faced a new challenge, one no army could fight for them. The challenge was political. How to build a nation from 13 independent, diverse colonies, each with its own interests, traditions, and visions of freedom. The question was simple but profound. What would America be? Delegates gathered in Philadelphia in 1787, their faces weary but determined, ready to confront the task of creating a government that could endure. The city buzzed with debates, whispers, and the occasional clash of tempers. Inside the dimly lit halls of the Constitutional Convention, the air was thick with smoke from candles and the weight of responsibility. Each man arrived with his own philosophy, some inspired by Enlightenment ideals, others wary of centralized power, many still haunted by memories of British tyranny. Between them, tempers flared, alliances shifted, and compromises became both necessity and art. The debates were fierce. Some demanded representation based on population, others insisted each state must have equal voice. Slavery, a festering and morally corrosive institution, threatened to unravel consensus. Compromises such as counting enslaved people as 3/5 of a person for representation were born from both pragmatism and moral blindness, a tension that would haunt the nation for generations.
Every sentence drafted, every clause considered, carried the weight of history. Outside the hall, ordinary citizens contributed to the shaping of ideas. Newspapers filled with essays, pamphlets, and fiery arguments, offering both praise and condemnation. The Federalist Papers, written by Alexander Hamilton,
Agreement that counted 3 out of every 5 enslaved persons for representation and taxation. It was a compromise born of necessity and pragmatism, but one that foreshadowed the enduring struggles over equality that would haunt the nation for decades. Beyond policy, the convention was a crucible of personalities. Gouverneur Morris, with his commanding presence and silver tongue, took on the task of drafting much of the document in polished prose, while Edmund Randolph and others challenged every word, insisting that every clause be precise and defendable. Tempers flared, alliances shifted, and midnight sessions stretched into the early hours. Delegates ate, argued, and slept in the same hall, knowing that their decisions were irreversible. Yet, amid the chaos, a remarkable achievement emerged. A document flexible enough to endure centuries, balancing power between states and a central government while protecting fundamental rights. Franklin, often the voice of reason, reminded weary delegates, "We must indeed all hang together, or assuredly we shall all hang separately." By the end of the stormy summer, the Constitution was signed, a product of rivalry, compromise, and vision. It was imperfect, controversial, and yet revolutionary, a foundation for a government designed to evolve, to be tested, and to endure. What had begun as a clash of tempers and ideas became the cornerstone of a new republic, proving that democracy was born not in consensus alone, but in the disciplined collision of competing wills striving toward a common purpose. The ink on the Constitution had barely dried when the real work of nation-building began. Drafting a document was one thing, turning it into a functioning government was an entirely different challenge. Across the fledgling United States, debates raged over ratification, interpretation, and the balance between liberty and order. Into this storm stepped the first generation of leaders, a group of men tasked with shaping a nation that had never existed before. Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison had already planted the seeds of understanding through the Federalist Papers, essays designed to persuade wary citizens that the new Constitution could protect freedom while providing strength. They argued tirelessly that a strong federal government was essential to prevent chaos, manage commerce, and maintain security. Hamilton, ever the strategist, envisioned a nation capable of competing on a global stage with financial institutions, credit systems, and an organized military. Madison, methodical and principled, believed that the Constitution balanced the powers of government with the rights of the people. Opposing voices, the Anti-Federalists, were equally passionate. Figures like Patrick Henry and George Mason warned that the Constitution could centralize power dangerously, threatening individual liberties and local authority. Town halls, taverns, and newspapers became arenas for fierce debate as ordinary citizens wrestled with ideas of sovereignty, taxation, and justice. The fight for ratification became not just a political battle, but a test of the new nation's ability to govern itself through reasoned argument and public persuasion. Once ratified, the new government faced immediate trials. The first Congress convened in 1789, establishing the framework for the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. George Washington, widely revered and carefully elected as the nation's first president, carried the weight of expectation on his shoulders. His leadership would set precedents for future generations, from the formation of a cabinet to the execution of foreign policy. Washington's calm, measured authority reassured a wary populace that the revolutionary experiment could survive beyond the battlefield. Meanwhile, Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton, and others clashed over philosophy and policy. Jefferson championed agrarian democracy and states' rights, while Hamilton pushed for a strong central government, a national bank, and the assumption of state debts. These debates were intense, often personal, but they forged the enduring American political system where national strategy became a defining feature of frontier life, revealing both the potential and fragility of America's westward expansion. In this uncertain environment, hope and fear existed side by side. Settlers dreamed of farms, towns, and schools, while native peoples fought to preserve their cultures, land, and autonomy. Conflicts foreshadowed the nation's ongoing struggle with displacement, treaties, and the moral complexities of expansion. Each new settlement, each cleared field, and each frontier skirmish reshaped the map, the economy, and the identity of the young republic. The westward push was more than migration. It was a test of the nation's principles, resilience, and vision. As settlers ventured into the unknown, they carried with them the promise of opportunity, the weight of responsibility, and the undeniable reality that every frontier advance had consequences for themselves, for their neighbors, and for generations yet to come. The story of expansion was a story of ambition, conflict, and the uncertain future of a nation still discovering the meaning of its freedom. While the Founding Fathers debated constitutions and built institutions, countless others lived in the shadows of the new republic, their voices largely ignored, but their contributions profound. Native Americans, enslaved Africans, women, and other marginalized groups shaped the contours of the nation, yet their experiences were often erased or silenced in the official histories of independence and expansion. To understand the United States fully, one must listen to these echoes of freedom, the stories of those who struggled, resisted, and survived on the margins. For Native Americans, the promise of liberty rang hollow. Treaties were made, then broken, as settlers advanced westward. Entire nations faced displacement, disease, and the erosion of culture. Yet despite these hardships, Native leaders negotiated, resisted, and adapted. Figures like Tecumseh attempted to unify tribes in a bold defense of their lands, demonstrating strategic vision and political acumen that rivaled the most celebrated founding fathers. Their resilience preserved cultural identities and challenged the nation to confront the human cost of expansion. Enslaved Africans bore an even harsher reality. Their labor fueled the economy, building farms, roads, and cities, while they themselves remained bound in bondage. Families were torn apart, and freedom was a distant dream. Yet even under oppression, enslaved people forged communities, passed down oral histories, and resisted in countless ways, through work slowdowns, secret gatherings, and daring escapes via networks like the Underground Railroad. Figures such as Harriet Tubman, though emerging in later decades, embodied a legacy of courage that began in this early period, reminding the nation that freedom was not a gift, but a right fought for daily. Women, too, challenged the limitations imposed upon them. While denied the vote and often excluded from political life, women influenced the revolution and the new republic in ways both visible and subtle. They managed households, maintained farms, and organized boycotts, most famously during the Daughters of Liberty movement, which produced homespun cloth and promoted non-importation agreements to undermine British trade. Women like Abigail Adams wrote letters urging their husbands to remember the ladies, pressing the revolutionary promise of liberty to include half the population long ignored in public policy. Other marginalized voices, free black citizens, indentured servants, and immigrant communities also shaped the nation's early economy, culture, and political life. They labored in ports, tended shops, and served in militias, contributing to the republic even as social hierarchies limited their recognition. Their struggles highlighted contradictions in a nation founded on liberty yet perpetuating inequality, forcing the United States to wrestle with its own ideals from the very beginning. Though often silenced in official accounts, these voices left indelible marks on American society. They shaped resistance movements, influenced policy, and ensured that freedom was not a concept reserved for a select few, but a contested, evolving principle.
Their stories revealed that the creation of the United States was not only a triumph of revolutionary leaders, but also a product of countless ordinary and extraordinary individuals striving for dignity, autonomy, and justice in a world that frequently sought to deny them. The echoes of these marginalized voices remain a reminder. The nation's history is richer, more complex, and more inspiring when it